what we saw with the Beatles and their trotting off to the east was really just a symptom of what was taking place in culture generally, and that is that seeking, that searching, that longing for something deeper, something more. And it was the large publicity that the Beatles gave to Eastern things that in part helped people in the West connect or reconnect with themes and ideas from the East. So we have begun to understand Buddhism, Taoism, Hinduism, amongst other Eastern ideas. And each of those has its own particular forms of monasticism and understanding. And again, I'm not going to say much about that because I want Scott to deal with that later in the day. But it has become a very important piece in the puzzle. And one of the books on the table is Thomas Merton's book, When He Went East, and it's his reflections on the things that he began to find in this connectionality between Eastern and Western monasticism. The next thread in the tapestry is the convergence movement. And the convergence movement was a movement really from the late 80s of evangelicals in the United States who took what has been called the Canterbury Road. That there they were being good evangelicals of whatever stripe, and then began to discover sacrament and mystery in ways that were missing from evangelical religion. And when evangelicals began to discover sacrament and mystery and they followed the path, then it led them, it's called the Canterbury Road because of the Sea of Canterbury, it led them to Episcopalianism. And once you start on that road of sacrament and mystery, it's a small step to then find monasticism because there's deep connections there. Now this was another path that we had taken. So you can see the path, if I can talk about, not the path, I'm mixing my metaphors here. The threads of the tapestry of the home church movement, we were in that. And the thread of convergence, we were in that. The thread of Celtic spirituality, we were part of that. And so we were contacted in 1999 by Archbishop Wayne Busada, who'd read the stuff that Jane and I were writing on Celtic spirituality, and he said, "There's some resonance here. Can we talk? Can we meet?" And we met Archbishop Wayne several times, and that eventually led to the formal chartering of Lindisfarne and our receiving of the apostolic succession. I want to talk about that a little bit more tomorrow in terms of the distinctives of Lindisfarne, because the gift of apostolic succession that we have in our community is quite precious and in some respects quite rare that as an independent jurisdiction we have that. The next thread of this tapestry are the new monastic communities, Rutber House, The Simple Way, and others from 2004 onwards. Brought some of these newer books for you to have a look at. Mention just two of them here. Jonathan Wilson is a theologian who was studying Alasdair MacIntyre's work in ethics, and wrote a short book. This is the second edition, Living Faithfully in a Fragmented World. MacIntyre, in his book After Virtue, which of caused a lot of stir in the 80s in philosophy and ethics. He presents a critique of the Enlightenment, which is the last 300 years of Western civilization. And towards the end, he says that it's his sense that we are in a new Dark Ages. And what helped civilization continue in the first Dark Ages, 500 to 1000, were monastic communities. And so he makes an argument that, or makes a suggestion really, that what might save us in the new Dark Ages are small groups of friends who practice virtues and civility. And then at the very end of the book he says, and perhaps what we really need is a new Saint Benedict. And Jonathan Wilson picked up on that, and just as a more or less an afterthought, said in his book, oh, this would be a good idea. Now, the next book is Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove, and this Jonathan is the son-in-law of this Jonathan. And so Jonathan, who studied at Duke Divinity School, picked up on some of his father-in-law's ideas with a bunch of other people, and started new monastic communities. They had a gathering in 2004, and there was another book floating around, but I couldn't find it, the 12 Marks of the New Monasticism. And a number of communities got together and put out the 12 Marks book. Now what's interesting about this thread in the tapestry is this takes us to the Anabaptist connection. Shane Claiborne, A Simple Way, and Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove are peace activists. I think both of them work with Christian peacemaker teams as Larry has worked with Christian peacemaker teams. And so they brought to new monasticism some Anabaptist sensibilities, which takes us back to those kind of radicals of the Reformation people, and living in radical community in poor areas of Philadelphia or Durham, North Carolina, other places around the USA, seeking to live according to a rule, new monastic rule, in service of the poor and the marginalized. Now, these are the threads of the new monasticism, and not all of the people and groups and movements and ideas that I've mentioned would own to the name new monasticism. And not all of these people, groups and teams agree with each other. There are new monastic groups that seem to be socially politically to the right, and others that seem to be socially politically to the left. There are theological conservatives and theological radicals and theological, we're not even on the page people. I'll let you decide where we fit there. Depends where you stand really, it's all perspectivist, isn't it? But they do share in common some of the spirit of monasticism that I talked about in the last session. So